The following teaching is by Jim Pugh through the ministry of God is Government. If you have never listened to one of our Bridge of Truth podcasts and wish to see all the topics taught through this Bridge of Truth ministry, please go to www.godisgovernment.com to find the inventory of Bridge of Truth podcasts. Now, welcome Jim Pugh as he presents another historical study of truth from history, Bible scripture, or current events.
Converting Carnegie. After the death of Rhodestead, Rothschild and the others set out to create the New World. Some notable quotes of the day stated, "Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere, as organized, to subtle, so truthful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." Woodrow Wilson. The democracy will cease to exist when you take away from those who are willing to work and give to those who would not. Thomas Jefferson. The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. English Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli in 1844. Behind the visible government, there is an invisible government upon the throne that owes the people no loyalty and recognizes no responsibility. To destroy this invisible government, to undo ungodly union between corrupt business and corrupt politics, is the task of a statesman. Theodore Roosevelt. Presidential campaign of 1912. At the turn of the 20th century, Andrew Carnegie was the richest man in America. He made his fortune in partnership with George Pullman, who sold railroad cars to the railroad companies. Carnegie next purchased a string of steel mills in Pittsburgh to form Carnegie Steel, which became a vertically integrated business, the prototype for the modern industrial corporation. The company owned not only the mills where the steel was made, but also the mines where the iron ore was extracted and the coal mines that supplied the coal. It controlled the ships and the railroads that transported iron ore and coal to the factories. The company also developed its managerial pool internally from the bottom up, rather than hiring managers from other businesses. In 1883, Carnegie fell under the spell of Herbert Spencer, whom he met at a dinner in the great British philosopher's honor at Delmonico's restaurant in New York. He sought out Spencer's company whenever he visited London and showered the philosopher with lavish presents, including a grand piano. In his autobiography, Carnegie claimed that it was with Spencer's help that he finally got rid of theology and the supernatural and found the truth of evolution. Through Spencer, the American steel magnate met and befriended Matthew Arnold, the esteemed British poet, social commentator, and agnostic. Arnold maintained that the notion of a personal God is unintelligible and unverifiable, a stance which Carnegie adopted. During his visits to London, Carnegie was soon rubbing elbows with the British ruling elite, including Prime Minister William Gladstone and Lord Archibald Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery, who was Lord Nathan Rothschild's son-in-law. A member of Rhodes's Society of the Elect, Rosebery served as Britain's prime minister from 1894 to 1895. When Rosebery visited America in the spring of 1883, Carnegie served as his tour guide and secured a private train to show the British aristocrat the anthracite deposits and collieries of eastern Pennsylvania, the natural oil fields of western Pennsylvania, and the steel rail mills of Pittsburgh, the dirtiest place on earth. The tour was such a success that Rosebery offered to put his American friend up for a seat in the House of Commons as a representative from Edinburgh, an offer which Carnegie rejected. Carnegie met Stead in the fall of 1883 at a dinner party hosted in London by Dolly Thompson, the wife of owner of the Pall Mall Gazette, where Stead served as the editor. Stead, who liked to bask in the company of the rich and powerful, sought Carnegie's favor. He defended Carnegie's suppression of the striking steel workers in Homestead, Pennsylvania, lavished praise on the industrialists' literary efforts, and even served as Carnegie's caddy at Skibo Castle, the American millionaire's 40,000-acre estate in Scotland. Through Rosebery and Stead, Carnegie became familiar with the plans of Cecil John Rhodes to bring about the reunification of Great Britain and the United States. In Triumphant Democracy, which was published in London in 1886, Carnegie wrote, "Let men say what they will, I say that as much as the sun in the heavens once shone upon Britain and America united, so surely is it one morning to rise, to shine upon, to greet again the reunited States, the British-American Union." This great rapprochement, he believed, was inevitable for racial reasons. The American, he argued, remains three-fourths purely British. The mixture of the German, which constitutes substantially all of the remainder, though not strictly British, is yet Germanic. The Briton of today is himself comprised in large measure of the Germanic element, and German, Briton, and American are all of the Teutonic race. Once the British-American Union came into being, Carnegie believed, it would dominate the world and establish universal peace. Such a giant among pygmies as the British-American Union, he wrote, would never need to exert its power, but only to intimate its wishes and decisions. But Carnegie stood in opposition to the Society of the Elect's claim that England must rule the world. America, in his estimation, had come to supersede Great Britain in wealth, industrial and agricultural production, and inventiveness. He wrote, "Many of the most important inventions which have contributed to the progress of the world have originated with Americans. No other people have devised so many labor-saving machines and appliances. The first commercially successful steamboat navigated the Hudson, and the first steamboat to cross the Atlantic sailed under the American flag from an American port. Americans gave the world the cotton gin and the first practical moving, reaping, and sowing machines, in the most spiritual, most ethereal of all departments in which man has produced great triumphs like electricity, and the position of the Americans is specifically noteworthy. What's more, America displayed a higher literacy rate, produced the greatest number of newspapers, and established political institutions that were comparatively pure and free from corruption. For this reason, the United States must spearhead the effort to create a one-world government. Britain, he insisted, possessed no other choice but to reunite with her giant child in order to avoid sure decline to comparative insignificance in the future annals of the English-speaking race." While Rosebery blanched at the notion of American supremacy in the new order of things, Stead embraced it and presented Carnegie's argument to Cecil Rhodes. Rhodes, Stead wrote, expressed his readiness to adopt the course from which he had at first recoiled, that of securing the unity of the English-speaking race by consenting to the absorption of the British Empire in the American Union if it could not be secured any other way. He expressed the deliberate conviction that English-speaking reunion was so great an end in itself as to justify even the sacrifice of the distinctive features and independent existence of the British Empire. Although they never met, Carnegie and Rhodes shared much in common. Both men were Freemasons. Carnegie was instrumental in obtaining the most complete collection of published works by and about Scottish poet Robert Burns, an ardent Freemason, for the library of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in Washington, D.C. Both were avowed agnostics. Both espoused the doctrine of evolution and the survival of the fittest. Both possessed an interest in the occult. Carnegie, as a young man, had been a Swedenborgian, a religious cult with ties to theosophy. Both, despite their vast wealth, were socialists. In an interview with the New York Times, Carnegie said, "I believe socialism is the grandest theory ever presented, and I'm sure someday it will rule the world. Then we will have obtained the millennium. That is the state we are drifting into. Then men will be content to work for the general welfare and share their riches with their neighbor." And both had ties to the House of Rothschild. Carnegie Steel had been financed by Jacob Schiff, who worked in tandem with the European Rothschilds, and Schiff, at the instigation of Lord Rothschild, would introduce Carnegie to J.P. Morgan. To be able to understand the current significance of the Schiff bloodline and its impact on world events, we will take a sidestep and review this family a moment. Family of Frankfurt on the Main, Germany. The earliest known member, Jacob Cohen Zedek Schiff, who is mentioned on the tombstone of his son, Uri Phoebus, as having discharged the function of Dayan at Frankfurt on the Main, must have been born about 1370. The earliest date to which any contemporary Jewish family can be definitely traced. Uri Phoebus Schiff attained a great age, as his tombstone mentions, and died 1481. He must, therefore, have been born about 1400. The name occurs on one of the signs of the Judengasse as early as 1613. In Middle High German, the word Schiff means a vial and may have been used as the sign of an apothecary or physician. The next member of the family mentioned is Meir Cohen Zedek Schiff, referred to as Parnas of the community, who died in 1626. The family has intermarried with the Adlers, Oppenheims, Wertheimers, Günzburgs, Geigers, Glogaus, Mannheims, and Hanaus, and one member married a cousin of Zunz. A step-grandfather of Heine was named Schiff, though of a branch of the family settled at Hamburg. Among the rabbinical authors included in the family are Meir ben Jacob Schiff, known as Maharam Schiff, d. 1644, David Schiff, editor of the Zema Dawid, and Tabeli Schiff, chief rabbi of the Great Synagogue, London, 1765-92, and author of Leshon Zahab. The most distinguished recent member is Jacob Henry Schiff, banker and philanthropist of New York. Jacob Henry Schiff, an American financier and philanthropist, born Janvier 10, 1847, at Frankfurt on the Main. He was educated in the public schools of Frankfurt and adopted the vocation of his father, Moses Schiff, one of the brokers of the Rothschilds in that city. In 1865, he emigrated to the United States and was employed for a time by the firm of Frank and Gans, Brokers, New York. In 1867, he formed the brokerage firm of Budge, Schiff & Co., which was dissolved in 1873. He then went to Europe, where he made connections with some of the chief German banking houses. Returning to the United States, he became on Jan 1, 1875, a member of the banking firm of Kuhn, Loeb, and Kofscher, New York, of which he was soon practically the head. Schiff's firm was chosen to float the large stock issues not only of the Union Pacific and Allied companies, but also of the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio, the Norfolk and Western, and the Missouri Pacific Railway companies, the Western Union Telegraph Company, and many others. It subscribed for and floated the three large Japanese war loans in 1904 and 1905, in recognition of which the Mikado conferred upon Schiff the Second Order of the Sacred Treasure of Japan. He was also received in private audience in 1904 by King Edward VII of England. Jacob H. Schiff was connected with many industrial and commercial activities. He was a director of the Union Pacific, the Baltimore and Ohio, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railway Companies, of the Western Union Telegraph Company, of the Equitable Life Assurance Society, of the National Bank of Commerce and the National City Bank, the Morton Trust Company, the Columbia Bank, the Fifth Avenue Trust Company of New York, and of various other trust companies in New York, as well as in Philadelphia. Jacob Schiff, through his firm Kuhn, Loeb and Commerce, New York, was used to finance the Bolshevik Revolution, also known as the October Revolution, which was a Marxist coup that took place in Russia in 1917. The Bolsheviks were left-wing socialists who believed that the working classes would eventually liberate themselves from the ruling classes. They wanted to create a socialist society based on equality. Their plans included giving workers in factories and on farms the same status, making the land, factories, banks, and natural resources the property of the state, rewarding peasants for their work. The Bolshevik Revolution was part of the broader Russian Revolution of 1917-1923. It was the second revolutionary change of government in Russia in 1917, following the overthrow of the imperial government in February. Kuhn, Loeb, and Commerce paid the Bolsheviks $20 million to finance the killing of the Russian czars, the Romanovs. We will get into this subject in detail when we look at the United States' involvement in proxy wars. Kuhn, Loeb, and Coors paid Leon Trotsky, another leader of the Bolsheviks, who spent time in New York in the 1910s, where he formed relationships with people on Wall Street who were against the Tsarist regime. The real name of Leon Trotsky is Lev Davidovich Bronstein. Jacob Schiff produced the offspring who we now know to be Adam Bennett Schiff, currently is an American lawyer, author, and politician, serving as the junior United States Senator from California, a seat he has held since 2024. He held previous offices as Representative CA 30th District, 2023-2024. Thanks to the association with members of the Society of the Elect, Carnegie developed his Gospel of Wealth, which he first proclaimed in an article that appeared in for an 1889 edition of the North American Review. While the government should supervise the distribution of wealth and provide for the needs of its citizenry, he reasoned, a cadre of millionaires should preside over the government. The emergency of such a ruling elite, he insisted, was the beneficent necessity of human evolution. The gap between the rich and the poor, he argued in the article, was organization and management were obliged to use their surplus revenue to benefit the vast majority of mankind who had evolved into serviceable drones. In exchange for such public benefactions, the men F means should be afforded the right to determine public policy concerning trusts, tariffs, monopoly, and regulation. With this gospel, Carnegie provided the blueprint for the formation of a shadow government that was to rule over America. After Carnegie sold his steel company to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, the highest price ever paid for a business at the time, Stead persuaded the industrialists to provide the funding, $40 million in today's money, for the construction of the Peace Palace at The Hague to house a permanent court of arbitration. The task of this court would be to settle disputes between nations and to bring about the complete banishment of war. The construction of the Peace Palace represented the first attempt to dissolve national sovereignty and national law under an institution with global jurisdiction. When the building was completed, Carnegie called it the most holy building in the world. Carnegie embarked on a crusade to create a League of Peace, or League of Nations, which would comprise a combination of the leading imperial powers, complete with an international police force. He even publicized his proposal in a short article entitled A League of Nations, which appeared in the pages of Outlook magazine, May 25, 1907. The creation of such an organization, Carnegie realized, would require control of America's educational and political institutions. Control that could only be achieved by the expenditure of vast sums of cash form a charitable foundation. These institutions would become reliant on these benefactions for their continued existence, and the trustees of the foundation thereby would gain control over their operations. In 1910, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, CEIP, set up its headquarters in Washington. D.C. Carnegie appointed 28 trustees, including Elihu Root, Senator from New York and former Secretary of War, Harvard President Charles W. Eliot, shipping and real estate magnate Robert Brookings, former Ambassador to Great Britain Joseph H. Choate, former Secretary of State John W. Foster, Cleveland Hoadley Dodge, President of Phelps Dodge, James T. Shotwell, President of History at Columbia University, and Nicholas Murray Butler, President of Columbia University. CEIP displayed Carnegie's continual close ties to J.P. Morgan, to whom he had sold his steel company. Throughout the first decade of the 20th century, the ties between the two industrialists tightened. Root, who became CEIP's first president, was Morgan's personal lawyer, while Cleveland Hoadley Dodge was a director of the Morgan-owned National City Bank in New York, and Joseph H. Choate served as one of Morgan's corporate lawyers, and Morgan remained under the control of the Rothschilds.
You have been listening to Bridge of Truth, brought to you by biblical teacher and author Jim Pugh with God is Government. For free access to all of Jim Pugh's Bridge of Truth podcast, please go to www.godisgovernment.com. Distribution of the Bridge of Truth and all other teachings are available for worldwide distribution. Thank you for joining us in this broadcast of Bridge of Truth.